Buenos días a todos. Welcome to El Poder de la Mujer, the Power of Women Rising. This is a series on Latina leadership that we're doing for Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're so happy today to have Rosemary Ravinal all the way from Miami, Florida. Rosemary is known as America's premier bilingual public speaking coach. So she's going to teach us a little bit about public speaking, which is going to be wonderful. She comes to us as the past VP of Public Relations for Univision, which is amazing that she did that, working in all kinds of media across Latin America. And she was past president of the Hispanic Public Relations Association. So she's really the voice for Latina leadership across the country, helping people really find their voice and learn to communicate more effectively. And that's what we're going to do today. But first of all, Rosemary, welcome. I've known Rosemary for many, many years. She was a participant in the National Hispana Leadership Institute. And wow, she took what she learned and became the premier speaking coach for us. So Rosemary, welcome. I'm so happy to see you again.
Juana, it's always a delight to spend time with you. We do go back, I'm going to say conservatively, more than 25 years. And you look amazing, and you're still doing amazing work. So,
ditto, sister.
Never stop. Never stop. Just keep going.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons you and I are so vibrant, is that we're still contributing to our community, helping people. And I am just so impressed with all the wonderful things you've done in helping people find their voice and to communicate effectively. One thing I do want to talk about is how that's a challenge for women and Latinas.
From obviously the communist takeover of the island. And that was I'm going to spill the beans here with my age, but I was in 1962. I was 7.5. And we were fortunate to be coming together. We stayed together as a family.
Oh, fabulous.
And like many exiles at the time, we never thought it would be forever. We thought it was going to be just a few years, and that will sort of change
work itself out.
Right, as so many governments in Cuba had just lasted a while, and this would soon go back to normal. It never did, obviously, 65 years later. In any event, we came together, but we settled in New York, where an aunt lived, because at the time, as most of these situations, if you have a sponsor, if you have someone who will be responsible for you, it's a lot easier to migrate.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the story of immigrants, where they try to find some family or find community where they can at least settle. Yeah.
Yes. And so we came under those conditions, and my mother and father, because they needed to establish residency here and make a new life here, they put me in boarding school for several years. It was actually 3 years in Catholic boarding school.
Wow. And I mentioned so you look a little like a nun there, girl.
I mentioned this episode because it was formative.
Yeah,
in several ways. It was formative because first, it traumatized me terribly. I had never been away from home. I was an only child. I was the kind of child that you described earlier as stay quiet, sit here, look pretty, don't say anything.
Oh, wow.
Don't make your presence known. Only talk when you're spoken to, and conform. That was the way I was raised. And being in a new place where I was the only child who did not speak English, I developed a debilitating stutter. In fact, for a couple of those years, I couldn't speak at all until my mid-20s, early 30s.
Oh, yeah.
And it defined my social interaction to the point where I became very reclusive, very private. I developed, however, in the course of all this, I learned English the hard way, school of immersion, parachute in, sink or swim,
right?
Have no choice. I have to learn the language. Thankfully, I learned it at a young enough age that I developed the ability to speak without an accent. And conversely, I can also speak Spanish without an accent. So I'm very fortunate to have that bilingual skill set. However, the stutter then put me in a situation where I found my expression in writing. I became a very good writer. I became an essayist in elementary school,
because
I became the editor of the college of the high school paper, and then the college paper, and so that was my outlet. That was my expressive outlet.
Yeah.
But
well, I want to just stop you there to pick up that lesson, because you took something that was a hardship, I guess, a challenge, and turned it into something that became very positive, which we're going to talk about how you took that and then became a communication coach, which is pretty amazing. But just your whole mindset as a child to adapt, to learn, to try to fit in, and then to use your skills to really become a leader, because that's what leaders do. But continue.
Yes.
Here you are, you're writing on the newspaper and you're the editor.
Yes. And interesting that when you reflect back at key moments in your early years, and I think as we mature, we are much more reflective about just those moments, those little seminal moments that we took for granted when they happened, but they become like pearls in a necklace. They really define our lives. Because I spent so much time alone after leaving the boarding school that I was basically a latchkey kid. I had imaginary friends who were my audience, and I spoke to them. I had this presence of being an orator and imparting great ideas. I didn't know what I was doing. I just liked having an audience there, and it was this imaginary audience. But I remember how good it felt, that I felt empowered. I felt that I was important, that I had command of my ideas. And it was something that I would say, oh, this is my practice. This is my stepping stone to becoming a public speaker. No, it was the farthest thing from my mind. But the play aspect of it really felt so, it was such a happy place for me to go, that now, with so many years later, I reflect and say, well, I was really meant to be doing this. So it's interesting how
which is
we don't
actually one of my
realize.
questions, because we do so much work in our leadership about your personal purpose and making sure you're in sync with that, because then your skills, your experience, your passion, all of that kind of comes together to help you be successful. And so I was going to ask you, when did you know about your purpose? And it seems almost like you were on a journey, kind of these stepping stones bringing you to where you are today.
Well, I didn't know. I didn't know for a long time. And unfortunately, it was in the 80s, so many of us were into the women's empowerment in corporate America. Do you remember we used to wear those little bows?
Oh yeah, we used to wear, well, they
And
called it cloning male behavior,
yeah,
because
yeah,
the only way
exactly.
you were going to be males is if you had your little suit on and you kind of, and thank goodness you learned how to speak in the power dynamic way so that they would listen, because it was also learning how to communicate in a whole totally different way.
Yes, but we were encouraged to adopt that kind of mindset. Yes, very, very male and very career focused, right? It was the multitasking, the superwoman. I was a mother. I was a single mother. I had been divorced several years when I started this big corporate job, and I felt, oh, I can do it all. Who needs sleep? And I realized many years later that that was not the formula. I was going further and further away from myself. I was playing a role that was sort of prescribed at the time, and those were the dimensions of success, but by someone else's standards. And it
Exactly.
wasn't until many years later that I started to peel the onion back and say, oh, no, no, that's not me. This inside here is me. But it still took me some time to be able to say, okay, I'm going to express it. I'm going to put it forward. I'm going to be bold and direct with the world to say, this is who I am. This is my gift to the world. And I'm going to do it on my terms. But I had to leave corporate America in order to do that. That's
Ah,
why, after leaving a very, very challenging and demanding role as head of public relations for Univision, it's now called Televisa Univision, that I said, okay, now I am free. I am free of the demands and the restrictions that come with having this kind of very visible role, that I can take all that I've learned through the school of failure and successes over the years to say, okay, what do I have that people need? And it was my ability to inspire people to up-level their ability to communicate. Because I've been doing that during the course of my career, helping CEOs, helping celebrities speak better. I've been doing it, but not as the core competence of my work.
well, one thing I really love about this story is that your purpose, or what you're going to do with your life, is very organic. So young women who are listening, they're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. But if they look back, like you just reflected on your childhood, and also look at what your passion is and what you want to do and how you want to live your life, it keeps unfolding, which I find very interesting in your story, because here you are at Univision helping celebrities and doing marketing and public relations for them, but it's really preparing you to help individuals and help groups and organizations learn to be good communicators, and also to communicate with passion and heart, which I hear a lot of heart in your speaking.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that I so value in the differentiator of my work. In other words, there's many, many very good public speaking coaches.
Yeah.
But what I feel I bring is that heart-centered understanding that if you're not speaking from your heart, then you're not doing your audience a favor. You're not serving them. Let me explain. It means so many people just mouth speeches and say things that they're supposed to say.
Right.
But when you feel it, when you own it, when you love it, it's yours. It's your truth. You become authentic. And those
Oh,
are the
I love
speakers
that.
and communicators that really resonate.
Mhm.
Because yes, you can be polished and you can be up at a podium looking amazing, but if the words don't connect with your audience, because they seem like they've been written for you, or they don't connect with the purpose and the passions and the interests and the needs of the people who are listening, then it becomes just a performance. So there's a difference between performance and actual connecting, delivering information that inspires, persuades, and elevates people.
Wow. Yeah, you know that the interesting thing is that speaking authentically is such an important part of being yourself. And one of the things that in leadership is to recognize that nobody can do what you do. Nobody has been born with your skills, your ability, your experience. And so there really is a special calling for every person to give their gifts. And in that, they grow and develop. You know, leadership is supposed to transform you as well as the people you're dealing with or working with or supporting or serving, because it elevates you to be your true self and to be your authentic self and to give your gifts. And what a great way to do it. So let me ask you this a little bit, since we're talking to during Hispanic Heritage Month and the great culture we come from. What are some nuances of Hispanic women or just Latinos when we go to communicate? I know I myself was taught to just like you, when you said you were young, you were taught to listen, to be obedient, to wait till you're spoken to. We come from a culture that many times children don't have the kind of efficacy they need in order to become great communicators. So, what do you think about our culture? And of course, we are speakers from the heart and we do have passion, but what could be some limiting things that you see when you coach Latinos?
I've had the pleasure, the privilege of working with young Latina professionals in my private coaching practice. I work with corporations and small companies, but I also enjoy and welcome individuals. And I'd say a dozen young Latinas, I'd say under 30 or under 35, have reached out for assistance with doing a presentation or doing a keynote speech or working with their teams, becoming a better, more communicative or more effective manager in terms of interpersonal skills. And many of them, I say almost all of them, have this factor of doubt whether to express their Hispanidad in the way they communicate. So some of them are concerned about having an accent. And I say, no, that's part of who you are. Embrace it. It's delightful, as long as you're being understood. But don't feel embarrassed or self-conscious about it, and never apologize about it. Just choose your words carefully and practice some words that are necessary for you to state your purpose, but don't be so self-conscious about it. It's part of who you are, just as your hair color, your facial features, all those things are part of who you are. The other thing that they face is a sense of context. Being able to take a Latino context and then put it into a different, more Anglo context, and being able to adapt. So there's cues and nonverbal cues as well as verbal cues that you need to just be aware of as to how people like to be addressed, how they like to interact with you, how you come across as assertive without being aggressive. There's a lot of nuanced ways of being who you are, but still being effective in teams and corporate environments, for example, where there are certain unwritten guidelines for behavior. You can still be effective, you can still be yourself, you can still exercise your leadership without sacrificing who you are.
So what would be 3 tips that you would say in order to have that kind of effective communication?
First and foremost, you have to really understand what you're talking about, know what you're talking about, know
Yeah.
your stuff.
Right. Do your homework.
There's no shortcuts.
Yeah.
You have to know what you're talking about. You have to be grounded in knowledge and speak with authority, with conviction, and be clear. Just get right to the point. Be clear and direct. Be concise. Don't
Mhm.
go, with these long tangents. One of the things I notice in meetings where I have been with younger Latinas is the tendency to ask a question or to interject an idea by saying the following: I could be wrong, but
Mhm.
I think blah, blah, blah. Or this is another version. Somebody might have asked the question already, but I have a question, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to put any conditions to it. You are, in a way, diminishing the value of what you have to say by putting a conditional phrase before it. You're apologizing for something that you really don't need to.
Right.
State your question. Be direct, be bold, be clear. And all those are tendencies that we fall into it because there's a sense of humility or fear of rejection, where you've been invited to this meeting. You're a participant like anyone else. Participate.
Mhm.
Know what you're talking about. Don't be afraid to suggest something. Of course, you don't want to put somebody else down, but you might just want to add something or validate someone else's opinion.
Yeah. Or
But
you can just say another way of looking at this.
yes, yes.
But yeah, I totally get it that sometimes when you don't feel like people are going to listen to you, you go like you add to somebody else's, or you say something beforehand before you say what you're going to say, and it really does diminish the impact and the clarity of what you want to say.
Yes, men do it too, but not with the frequency that I have observed women do it. Another thing that I tell my clients is never attend a meeting where you haven't made your presence known. So if you're in a meeting and you're sitting around a table, or you're in a Zoom call or Teams, or you're in a conference call, say something. Say something at some point, even if you say, Juana's idea was wonderful. I would like to make that happen. How can I help?
Mhm.
Or I echo what was said before. I think it's a very important approach to solving our problem.
Yeah.
Something, make your voice heard, because otherwise you don't exist.
Yes.
And people do take notice when people speak up. But again, know what you're talking about and do it with professionalism.
Yeah. Well, I have a funny story I'd like to share about that. Way back when I was part of it was called the Colorado Alliance of Businesses, and they were doing a strategic plan, and I got asked to be on it, and there were only 3 of us that weren't white males. And it was, for those of you who drink beer, Bill Coors was one of the co-chairs. And I remember when I was going in the meeting, I was really frightened. I mean, sometimes when we have to go into, or when we go to a next level and it's your first meeting or whatever. And so I did a lot of self-talk and preparation before I walked in so I could walk in with some presence. And it was funny because what I said to myself was, Juana, for you to walk into this meeting and sit with these men who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth or a silver bullet, which is a beer, in their hand, you got it going on. A lot of times we think that we're being invited to the table and that we don't have the right stuff or haven't had the right experience. But in reality, for a Latina or a woman or somebody from our background to be invited to sit at the table, we have had to overcome a lot of challenges in order to be there. And we also know what they know, in a sense, because we've been educated in dominant culture organizations and universities. And so I always try to tell or share that you do this prep talk before you go into a meeting. You take some deep breaths and you walk in with some stature, even before you sit down, But it does take that kind of preparation.
Yes. And you mentioned fear, and that can be a great ally. I work with people who say to me, the first thing they say when I'm doing an exploratory call, I fear public speaking. I am
Yes.
terrified of public speaking. And I say, good. It's normal. That's what happens with people who are very self-aware and are concerned that they're going to be rejected, that there's going to be too much scrutiny, and that you're going to fail. Good. Let's harness that. Let's take that energy and
Yeah.
turn it into something positive because
Yeah.
it's totally normal. But what you
Well,
said is important. Preparation is key. Go
uh-huh.
into a meeting understanding who's in the room, what the important topics
Preparation.
are.
Yeah.
Prepare
Know
yourself
who
with
the
some
people
background.
are, know what the agenda is, be there early, which is
Yes.
really important because then they know you're ready for action. These are all such important tips for people. And now that we're virtual, how can you use some of this in your virtual reality when you have to be on a Zoom call like this?
Uh-huh. This was my sweet spot. I developed a curriculum by necessity to
Yes.
teach people how to survive on Zoom. And still, there is a need, and I am getting booked to do workshops on this topic. I thought by
Love
now
it.
people would have gotten it,
Yeah.
but maybe
We
no.
live in a Zoom world now.
How you show up makes the world of difference, whether it's evident to everyone in the room or not, how you're perceived. So you have to take some measures. Just as you groom yourself before you go out the door, prepare yourself to be in this rectangle looking the best you possibly can. There's tons of information out there in terms of how to do it. You need good lighting, you need a good camera, you need a good microphone, and you need to know that you have a sense of real estate around you that either works for your advantage or doesn't. If you're in a place that is out of sync with who you are and have some weird background, then it doesn't work for you. But you can tailor that through various features, green screen, you can change your artifacts. You can curate your background in some way, just as you have done, Juana, with the flowers and artwork and such, and I have done with mine.
I
And
learned this from you.
everything in this shot, in this rectangle, speaks to who you are.
Yes.
So, what a fun opportunity to prepare this theatrical space where you're showing up as your best, not only in terms of your ideas, your words, but your values.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't take the Zoom call as serious as they do if they were in a meeting. They're in and out and they're not paying as much attention, or they don't prepare as much. And I think we're living in a virtual reality now where that is becoming more and more important, and people learning how to use Zoom as a tool to enhance their own power and their own ability to communicate with folks. It takes
Yes.
a while though, doesn't it? I mean, I remember my first Zoom calls and you're sitting there going like, wow, am I really going to be able to do this? By the way, I saw you using your hands when you were talking, and I watched that video. Will you show them a few of the ways to use your gestures? Because
Sure.
we are a
Sure.
community that talks with our hands.
Well,
How can we use this as a power thing?
we tend to use our hands more than maybe some other cultures. However, be use them wisely. Because if you're some people get very nervous and they tend to do this. They tend to gesture right to the lens,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
look what
yeah.
happens. It's like these monstrous hands. You don't want to do that. You want to stay in your plane and to use them as punctuation marks, as so,
Punctuation
yeah. So if you
marks.
want to say something is wonderful, right? You just put the fingers out. Something is great, or you want to have a sense of framing an idea. This is what's important to impart to people if they want to improve their Zoom presence, Juana. So I'm using my
So you're
hands as
framing the
emphasis,
idea.
framing,
So it's
framing
like
the idea.
emphasis. Aha. I
Another
love.
wonderful technique is if you're talking about progression of things over time. So you say from yesterday to today.
Aha.
So you can say, or if something is multi-step, you start with step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And so remember those cartoons that had the bouncing ball,
Yes.
right? You're using your hands to guide the flow of information in this shot. So it has a similar effect. Another thing is to enumerate. If you say, I have 3 ideas for everyone today, idea number one, number 2, number 3. So you can use your digits as guideposts so that people know if I've said my first idea, they're going to be waiting for the second and the third because I've already given them a clue, a preview of there being 3 ideas.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can invite engagement. Also amounts, tall, low, high, low. Make sure that your hands are in the shot when you're doing it. So know where your range is so that you're not doing something off the screen. So you can use your hands for emphasis. So that's it. But try not to play with your hair or play with your ear, your earring, or do things that are more
distracting.
Nervous habits.
Oh, this is one we had, right? What does this one mean?
Oh, this is thank you. This is thank you. This is it has several meanings, as you know. It could be in a namaste, but it's also thank you very much for your attention. It's been a delight to work with you today. So it has, there's Tim Cook from Apple has a habit of doing that after he speaks in public or when he does an interview. And one thing that's important for everyone to know is that scientific studies show that more than 80% of what we communicate is nonverbal, meaning not the words, but everything else. The body, the movement, the tone of voice, the pitch, the rate of speech, the volume, all these things, eye contact, there's facial expressions, and then there's body expressions, body language. So there's different channels where we communicate things, but the vast majority of the information that our brains receive is not the words. Words are the very important.
Well, our heart.
Everything else
our heart has more neutrons than our brain. There's a whole thing about feeling and physicality, and which I think many times the dominant culture tends to ignore because it is a left brain kind of culture that really talks about data and strategies and verbal, and in the beginning was the word, is how the Bible starts. So it's very communicative in that way, and yet we can add to that, which I think brings us to what really being multicultural or being Latino is, that we have some advantages to add to communication, as well as, learning how to speak strategically, speak with clarity. And also, you've talked about being concise, which I think is always a challenge for Latinos because we're a verbal culture. We're an oral tradition culture. We love stories. We love to embellish, right? And so we're telling all these details, whereas the other culture is more succinct and more focused. So would you agree with that? That we
Yes, totally.
Flores, the whole idea of flores, that we give flowers, that we compliment.
Yes. The multilingual brain is sharper. It's a fact. That brains that can process the cognitive process of multiple languages just makes us have greater capacity for learning and understanding. So that's an advantage. But I want to say a couple of things in reference to what you just said. First, embrace the 2 languages equally. And if some of your listeners and viewers tend to skew more Anglo, make sure you don't forget the Spanish and go back and continue to learn it properly. It will serve you so well, not only as an accelerator for your career, but it also is a keeper of culture. So don't fall into Spanglish. Take time to continue to learn more words. I'm always collecting words. I'm listening to a radio interview in Spanish and I hear a word, I write it down. I didn't know that word. I want to use that word. And it should always be growing your language ability in both languages, but particularly don't neglect the Spanish. It is such a treasure to be able to be fully bilingual and then to carry the language values and the stories that come with it into your successors, into your family, into your neighbors, into building community. Now, the other thing, it's sort of a pet peeve, is if your name is Perez, and someone is saying Perez, correct them. We have to start letting people know how to pronounce our names. There's Polish names and Russian names, and they are very difficult to pronounce, but somehow people get it correctly. It's Perez, not Perez. And you do it gently, you do it nicely. It's not Martinez, it's Martinez. If you want to say it with an Anglo accent, Martinez. Fine.
Right.
But don't let them get away with it, because it's diminishing. It's like calling me Ravino. It's Ravenel. And when
Right.
people say it incorrectly, I say it's Ravenel. Oh, and the person is often, if you say it nicely, the person is accepts it with grace. You
Right.
hope, but it doesn't matter.
Well,
because
especially
educate
for
them.
I wanted to say a couple things for our young leaders. And one is we're the fastest growing Spanish speaking country in the world.
Yes.
And America will be bilingual. Si quieres hablar español, toca el número uno. I mean, we are a bilingual economy because of our numbers, our buying power, our youthfulness. There's so much going on where Latinos really will shape the future. And so I want to say, because my children are not bilingual, they know some Spanish, they've studied some, that even if you're not bilingual, to learn part of the language, to learn the dichos, the sayings like, well, the most famous one is mi casa su casa, but mi palabra es la ley, which means what I say, I do. It's so important to know the culture and to realize that I call it the Latino advantage. We're adding to, and the majority of people in this hemisphere speak Spanish, and it's the second most spoken language in the world. So you can speak Mandarin, but you have to go to China. You can speak Spanish in 26 different countries. So it's such a powerful tool that we're bringing, and not to mention what you said, the bilingual brain has more neutrons kicking in. It has more firepower. So for us to be bicultural, bilingual, multicultural is so important. And the other thing for young women that are listening, sometimes it's hard for them to understand how hard it was for us to speak Spanish in our generation, and how much having an accent was a negative thing, and that it's up to us now to really transform that. We live in a global community. Speaking another language is one of 5 competencies you need in the global age. So we need to embrace that. And I love to see Anglos that are learning Spanish as well, because it's an opportunity for them to grow and learn.
Yes.
So,
And particularly now in the year 2024, as you know, we have taken many steps back as a society. And so the concept of diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism is not as accepted as it was even a year or two ago.
right.
So we need to stand firm in who we are, and not take any steps back, and to be bold and authentic in our cultural essence. And that's, maybe we don't call it DE&I, but we'll call it being Latina, being Cuban American.
Also being just multicultural and accepting all the different cultures, because we are all the different cultures, Latinos are, and just embracing that. I think that's the next step in human evolution, for us to become multicultural, and the majority of kids under 18 already are. So that is the future. And so for young people that are with us today, embracing your language, learning as much as you can, embracing your culture, understanding that you're adding value to this new world that's evolving. But
Yes.
Rosemary, you've done so many wonderful things in your career. Tell us a little bit about maybe a challenge or a setback and how you handled it. So, and I also was going to say, when you were talking about learning Spanish, that leaders are lifelong learners. So like you writing down different words, I do the same thing. So that we keep learning and keep our brains moving. But what
Yes.
about a challenge or something you feel like that people could learn from, how to overcome challenges that are in your path?
Oh, life is full of challenges. It's just how you choose to respond to them. And I would say there have been more failures than successes in my life, but it depends on how you classify them both. If I can say a career mistake is that I did not take my failures as lessons. I took them as
Failures.
very personally, took them very
Yeah.
personally
Yeah.
as evidence that I am not good, that I am deficient, that I am less than. And that's the biggest failure of it all, is to put all that into a bucket and say, see, this proves that I am not good enough, that I'm going to keep beating myself up. And that's a very easy place to go because you feel like a victim. And being a victim absolves you of any responsibility. So it's turning it around saying, no, all these things are there for my good. That if you understand that you have a spiritual core, that you have God essence in you, that you're not alone, and that all these things are lessons. It depends on what you do with them. But mind you, it took me a long time to understand that. And I lived in a negative state for way too long. And I think that
Well, actually, to kind of add something there, I think it was hard when I went to the university and there weren't any people that looked like me,
Mhm.
or when you entered school and you couldn't speak the language and you said you just kind of withdrew.
Mhm.
I mean, I think there have been some things that are hard. I didn't know I was smart till I got to graduate school. I just thought I was working really hard, and I was. So I think there is that sense of that I didn't have the right stuff or that I wasn't smart or whatever. But at some point you pop out of that and realize here you are. And all those challenges just made you stronger. They say if it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. and
Right.
and if we're leaders, or if we are people, like you say, with a spiritual center, to be able to look at our failures or our mistakes as opportunities to grow, to change, to learn, maybe even not to be as sensitive, because we talked about, a lot of times, particularly women and Latinos, we take things personally, and to be able to just step back and say, wait a minute, what did I learn and how did I get here? Let's look at the challenges I've overcome to get here. But tell me something specific that you think you really look back now and say, that was a challenge, but I overcame it, and here's what it taught me.
Okay. I was in charge of a group of predominantly women. This was at a cosmetic company that did direct sales. And
Oh,
I
I
was
love that. I remember when you worked there.
yeah, it was Avon, and I
Yeah.
was put in charge of 24 district managers who were in turn responsible for recruiting and stimulating sales by the representatives, by the people who go door to door to sell to their
Oh, 1
neighbors.
minute for our young viewers. Avon was a product that was sold door to door. I think my mother might have even sold some of it, or at least she bought it. So in the old days, we had actual representatives that would come and have makeup parties and, make you look good.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
may not even know what Avon is.
that still goes on, at least in some of the very Latino communities. There's still these little signs that say Avon sold here. So maybe they pop up in
Wonderful.
a shopping area. In any case, I came from public relations, but I was sent into this assignment because at the time it was sort of part of the leadership journey to do time in the field, to do the work, the grunt work in the field, and really understand the point of sale process. I thought it was valuable because obviously if you're in the corporate sphere and you're not on the ground where the bread is being made, you don't have a full understanding of the business. So one thing that's important for anyone to really get ahead, you have to understand, have context of the business, really
Yeah.
understand how it works. And so to get inside the machine, so to speak, and really and be curious about it. So I thought this was a great opportunity to have that experience. And I did it well for a couple of years, but I didn't know how to really listen to people. These were people who were not business people. They were extraordinary performers, great human beings, very active in their communities. These are the people that I oversaw. But my mistake, my real failure there was that I looked at them as employees. I tried to
Oh,
get
yeah.
them to act differently, as opposed to just taking the nature of how they performed and how their secret sauce. Each one had something special, and grow that and nurture that, as opposed to trying to change them and make them into a corporate persona. And that was very disappointing. I failed in the second year of that job. Well, I didn't fail. I was moved into a different area of the company because I wasn't cut out for that. I didn't have the soft sort of the velvet touch. I was more hard-nosed, getting them to move their numbers, to sell more, to
All right.
perform better, as opposed to giving them love as human beings.
Mhm.
And that was a
Well, you know
lesson
that the
in
part of
learning,
it,
in
yeah, and
listening.
that's learning a different
Mhm.
form of leadership, really.
Right.
Because I remember when I started studying leadership, and it was like in the old days, people had to follow the leader, that which you were the leader. But in today, you have to follow the people. You have to figure out exactly what you said. What is the individual's potential? What's the
Right.
individual's gift? How are they wired? And what's going to really motivate them? You know, I always say that leaders have intrinsic motivation. That's why we're leaders. We want to do things, we want to challenge things, we want to accomplish things. But it's our job to help other people get intrinsically motivated, you
Yeah.
know, so we have to know a lot about them. So, I mean, I don't see it as a failure. I see it as a huge learning opportunity for you to move into a different form of leadership, which is kind of like where we are today, looking at leadership that serves people and really develops people. That's your job as a leader, to help others become not
Right.
only leaders, but
We're
own.
leaders. We're leaders in many ways that we don't even realize. You know, we could
Exactly.
be in our neighborhoods. We could be leaders by simply helping people unexpectedly, unsolicited. You know,
Right, right.
bring in the garbage can after the garbage truck has passed by, so that the rain doesn't that doesn't get full of rain. You know, helping someone in the garden, bringing some baked goods to someone just because they're a neighbor.
Right.
That is leadership in terms of forging connections.
Yes, which is
And
what
you might think, oh,
it's
that
about.
person
It's
is
about
interested.
relationships.
But unless you try, you have to knock on that door.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised what happens when they open that door and you find out, that there's magic there.
Well, you know, the other thing that I think is important in your lesson is that some of us aren't made out to manage and people. I mean, we're just not. We're better like as a presenter or as a teacher or as a coach or whatever. And that's another real lesson, is to figure out what are your skills, and you know, how can you use those and maximize those, because we can't do everything. And there's other people who are fabulous at managing teams and managing people. Well, and so share with us now what you're proudest of. You said that's a challenge. If you look back now, what would be something you would say, Juana, I really am
My proudest moment,
yeah.
that would be that's much easier to answer because I had the privilege of being an on-air contributor for MSNBC during its first 2 years. And I was selected, I was the token Latina. They wanted to have a multicultural group of people commenting extemporaneously on the day's news. It was live, it was unscripted, and I was selected after some casting calls of sorts for my leadership in the community and my ability to speak to the camera without live, without prompting. And that was extremely challenging because it was, put it this way, I didn't know what topics were going to be. I knew what the newspaper headlines were, but I didn't know what the anchor was going to ask.
Right.
And it was maybe Katie Couric asking, or Ann Curry. And they, of course, they knew, they came from the news side, but we didn't know what the topic was going to be. And so there was a sense of really almost like impromptu speaking of, when they went around the table and they said, well, what do you think, Rosemary, about this? It's like, uh, you have to have something intelligent to say because it's live. There's no second chance. You can't say, wait a minute, can you come back to me? Can you check with me in an hour? Let me research this. No. And so that really sharpened my skills. It was really the most intense experience in speaking with confidence, speaking intelligently, speaking. Also, you had to be concise. You couldn't be long-winded.
Yeah,
You had just
that's for
15
sure.
seconds perhaps to answer the question. That was an extraordinary experience. It has served me so well.
Wow. Was it fun?
It was so much fun that I almost didn't want
I
to
mean, it
leave.
sounds very exciting to those of us who haven't been on that kind of a TV, you know, or being interviewed that way. But obviously, you were prepared for that through all of your work in public speaking. And you know, as you look at your life, also there, especially for young Latinas, they always ask me, "How do you keep on keeping on? How do you stay young? How do you stay involved?" What would be some things that you would advise young women? As far as taking care of themselves so that they can reach their potential, so they can achieve their goals.
Yes, recognize your beauty just as you are. There's so many beauty musts and things that we need to do in order to be loved. And that love has to start with you. Love yourself just as you are, whatever shape, size you are. Most important is to be healthy. To be
Yes, of
healthy and really
course.
understand how your body
Yeah.
works, how
Yes.
your mind, how your body, your organism works. It is a very sophisticated machine. Our bodies are extraordinary. The intelligence in our cells is incomparable. So trust that, but honor the biology and taking care of our bodies, and proper nutrition, proper sleep, and joy, being in a joyful state, doing things in nature, being in among good-hearted people, being in good company.
Yeah. Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. And that's because tell me who you're with and I'll tell you who you are. But it goes beyond that. It's choosing the right people to be around you that reaffirm you and that love you the way you are, as you said. But I love that idea of accept yourself the way you are. And I'm going to encourage everyone who's listening to just jot down 5 things they love about themselves, because I can remember in my 30s when I was working on my self-image and who I was. And I think we all need to do that. It's like a snake shedding its skin of the old programming that we had as children, particularly if you were growing up a minority in America. And I would write positive affirmations about myself. I love myself because I care. I love myself because I am committed. I love myself because I'm a family person. I love myself because I'm energetic and kind, just to continue. I even used to keep a little jar. They call it a gratitude jar. And, but I think, that Tony Robbins is the #1 speaker in America. And he says, you got to get up every morning and do that. You have to get up every morning and say, I'm going to win this one. I feel great about myself. It's not something where you get the bendición or the blessing and all of a sudden you're wonderful. But it's up to you. You program your mind as to how you feel about yourself every single day.
Gratitude is immense. Gratitude for everything, for every breath, for every day. We have how many weeks? It was 4,000 weeks in our lifetime. I had it written down here because I always forget.
4,000 weeks.
4,000 weeks. It's not a long time if the lifespan of a person. Every moment counts. So what are you going to do today that brings you joy? And by that, I mean that brings you joy, being effective, being relevant, being of service, helping someone, doing your best. Ask yourself that. And there's another very important, motto for myself: showing up. Show up. Go to someplace in person. Show up for someone. Give someone attention. That is the biggest gift you can give someone, is attention. Maybe it's
I want to say this to the young people. You can't be on your phone to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a very distracted world. And yet when you talk about leadership, when you talk about effectiveness, when you talk about being there, it requires you to be present. And so you can't be doing 2 or 3, 4 things at once. And particularly to give people their attention as a communicator. You know that if you're not paying attention to people, you really can't communicate with them.
Yes, really listen. I mean, listening is a whole art, but that has to be reciprocal. You speak and then you give the person space for them to talk, and you listen. And you listen with interest, and you ask good questions. Well, tell me more. Tell me more about that. I don't know very much about skydiving, but tell me more. How does it feel? Where do you go? And a whole world opens up for you.
Yeah. And I also think that, we live at a time when people are, I hate to say this because you could say it about everyone, when we're too self-centered. And to be other-centered is the key to relationship building, to actual leadership, and, to really take that interest in other people. And my mother always used to say, if you were moping around, she'd say, get busy and do something for someone else.
Yes.
I think paying too much attention to yourself is overrated.
Yes.
It's just overrated. So if you can do for others like you've been telling us to do, if you can really think about, how am I going to show up today? What can I do to make the world a better place? Thank God I have a bed that I slept in, that, I have a home, to really motivate yourself with that sense of gratitude. You know, they say that gratitude is even more important than love, because gratitude is love in action. We're
it
actually
is.
doing something. We're being thankful. So anyway, one last thing, but go ahead.
No, I wanted to say there's a quote that I love. I have an inspiration board that's right next to my workspace. And I put things there. It's a sort of an affirmation. It's quotes. It's all kinds of things that just a quick glance remind me, refresh my screen of sorts. If my screen is getting cloudy and gray and dark, by looking at these things, refreshes and brings new light to the moment. But there's one from Rumi. That's not from Rumi. It's from Khalil Gibran. And it goes like this: work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. So it's love your work. Love what you do, because the work that you do is an expression of your love. That to me is really calibrates everything for me.
Yeah. And I loved how you framed that.
Yes.
But the other thing I wanted to say, here's another wonderful tip for everyone who's listening: get yourself a vision board. Surround yourself, like Rosemary and I try to do, with things that really inspire you. Because it really is a day-to-day thing. I mean, like I said, you don't just wake up one morning and you're perfect. You wake up that morning and say, this is going to be a perfect day. And what a gift we have that we're able to be able to do that, to use our mind to develop that which we want in our lives. It's such a wonderful gift. So what I was going to ask you was, you know, you've done so much, Rosemary, and you're such a beautiful and magnanimous soul. Well, what would you like people to remember about you? I don't know if you remember this, but when you were in the leadership program I ran, you had to write your epitaph, which is an interesting thing for everybody who's listening. Write your epitaph. What do you want people to think about when they think about you after you're gone? Your legacy.
Well, the work is love made visible could be on the epitaph, but I see myself as kind, generous, and curious. And the word curiosity is one that I like to use often, because the curiosity keeps you always learning. It's a wonderful attribute to have. Always be curious, asking questions. So that's not what I want in the epitaph. What I want in the epitaph is that she led a wholehearted life.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah. Being wholehearted comes from Brene Brown, and it's really being the fullest human being that you can be.
So tapping into your whole talent, your experience, your life. I really, really love that idea. And, you know, I think especially for Latinos today, this is our time. You know, the young Latinos that are listening, during your lifetime, we really will become the dominant force in the country. You know, we're rising into power. Latinas are rising. And I want to thank you so much for these communication skills, because if we can learn to really communicate who we are authentically, if we can listen to other people and really have that connection with them, care about them, build those relationships, and if we can also learn how to have greater impact, because it's time for us to step into leadership, yes. I think that we can really transform the world.
Indeed, we can. And tell your story in your own words. Don't let someone else tell it for you.
Yes, tell your story, because that's where we all began. So, Rosemary, thank you so much. I hope this is a fabulous Hispanic Heritage Month for everyone, that they really step into their power. Please let us know where they can get more information. It'll all be in the recording, but let them know how to get a hold of you.
RosemaryRavenel.com.
Spell Ravenel for them, please.
Rosemary, one word, like the herb, Ravenel, Ravinal.
Yeah. And I would encourage all of you to take one of Rosemary's webinars or coaching, and to really just think about how we can communicate with love, with impact, with clarity, with commitment, and really move forward together as a community. So thank you, Rosemary, and te quiero.
Igual. Thank you, Juana. This was delightful. Thank you.